All right, so we're going to talk about cellular respiration. This is sort of the opposite of photosynthesis. It's definitely the next step after photosynthesis. So we've been talking about light energy being turned into chemical energy, which is sunlight, typically into glucose, a type of sugar. This process is called photosynthesis, and it takes place in the chloroplast. Now we're going to talk about the next step, where cellular energy, this glucose, will be turned into, chemical energy, glucose will be turned into cellular energy, which is ATP. And ATP, we've talked about, is the currency of the cell. That is how the cell uses energy. This process of turning glucose into ATP is called cell respiration, cellular respiration, and it happens in the mitochondria, which we've got drawn here. So let's start with glycolysis. We've got glycolysis. It happens in the cytoplasm, which these other things over here are going to happen in the mitochondria. And typically when we draw the mitochondria, we draw a jelly bean looking thing with the squiggly line in it. That's how you'll see it drawn a lot. And you see the chloroplast here. We've got the nucleus with the rough ER and the ribosomes. But we're going to focus on this red mitochondria today. That's what we've got blown up here. So the second and the third step will happen here. The first step starts in the cytoplasm, and it starts when glucose, C6H12O6, the sugar, is broken down. And this breakdown costs 2 ATP, but it creates 4. So overall, if you spend $2 and somebody gives you $4, you've got a net gain of $2. So in this case, it's a net gain of 2 ATP, overall gain of 2 ATP. If you'll notice, it breaks down into pyruvates, and you'll notice that C3H6O3 is half of each of these. That's because it's coming from the broken down glucose. Is going to be half. There's going to be 2 of them, and if it mixes with oxygen, like we write in our thing, we see that it mixes with oxygen, or if in the presence of oxygen, it's going to go through what's called aerobic respiration. If it does not have oxygen, it's without oxygen, it's called anaerobic respiration. So I'll talk to you first about anaerobic respiration. So anaerobic respiration is going to be without oxygen. That's what that anaerobic means. So if you do aerobics over here, this is aerobic respiration. Aerobic is going to be with oxygen. So if you do aerobics, it's going to be exercising, running, swimming, something that gets your heart beating, because you're breathing a lot. You need a lot of oxygen. Anaerobic is the opposite. It's not aerobic. It's without oxygen. This leads to less ATP. This process does not make nearly as many ATP molecules. And there's 2 types we talk about: lactic acid and alcoholic fermentation. So some examples of lactic acid: if you run long distance, and you're not used to it, or your muscles, for whatever reason, go through a lot of work under low oxygen, without oxygen, under low oxygen environment. So that may mean you're out of breath, and your lungs can't get oxygen to your blood, into your blood and to your cells well enough. You're going to end up with sore muscles. That is called lactic acid. That feeling, that the chemical that's in your muscles that probably burns, if you've ever done a day or 2 days after you've worked out, that sore muscles, that's from lactic acid, because you've been working out and your muscles did not get all the oxygen that they need. This is also in some preserved foods. You'll get to alcoholic fermentation. If you've heard of alcohol, there's different types of alcohol. There's like isopropyl alcohol. This alcohol that we're talking about, examples of that would be wine or beer or bread. These are this comes from it's essentially rotting grapes or rotting hops or yeast. It has to do with the use of sugar under a low oxygen or zero oxygen environment. So if you've ever opened up or smelled rotting fruit, maybe it's in a container and you left it in there, pulled it out, and you opened it and it's a very, very strong smell. It smells alcoholic. That's why it smells like alcohol, because it's gone through alcoholic fermentation, and that's how that happens. So when things rot, that's what grapes rot, they turn into wine. Hops, another type of plant, rot, they turn into beer. If it's honey that rots, it turns into mead. Different things rotting and breaking down in a low oxygen environment. It's called alcoholic fermentation. And it not as much energy is produced. Again, very little ATP. So that's without oxygen. With oxygen, we've got over here, with oxygen, it's called aerobic respiration. This is where most of our energy comes from. Let me pause for a second. Glycolysis, and the steps we're going to go through. Glycolysis is step 1. Then we've got step 2 is the Krebs cycle. Step 3 is the Electron Transport Chain, the ETC. So let's start here. In the mitochondria, the Krebs cycle starts when we get oxygen in here and we get these two pyruvates. So step 1, glycolysis, breaks down the pyruvates, and then if it gets into the mitochondria, the pyruvates with oxygen can create several things here. So we've got NADH and FADH. Those are our two charged molecules. They've got energy, and we'll see them used over here. This Krebs cycle uses oxygen, but a waste product is going to be CO2, carbon dioxide, and you can see it exiting the cell. Another thing that not a waste product, but a product of it is 2 ATP. So we've got 2 ATP. So the Krebs cycle makes NADH and FADH, sends it over here to the electron transport chain, and what you need to know about the ETC is that it creates a huge amount of ATP. Remember, over here we're making 2 ATP, anaerobic respiration. If there's no oxygen, it's going to make very little ATP. And the Krebs cycle itself with oxygen is going to make 2 ATP because a lot of that energy went into charging these two molecules. These two molecules in the ETC are going to make water, and again, in the presence of oxygen, it's going to make water, but it's also going to make a lot of ATP. And then when the NADH and FADH are used up, they're going to be sent, similar to how we did in the chloroplast yesterday, they're going to be sent back, FAD plus and NAD plus, they're going to be sent back to the Krebs cycle, and they're going to be charged and sent back. So it's going to be this cycle. Here's a Krebs cycle over and over, charging dead FAD and NAD pluses, and then sending those NADH and FADHs once they've been charged. Once these have been charged, they're going to be sent back into the ETC, and it's going to create ATP. So we've got a bunch of different ways that we can get ATP. The biggest bulk of it is going to come from the ETC, and this is cellular respiration.